Hello there and welcome to Homeschooling Adventures. My name is P. Jerauni. In today's video we are going to be looking at externalities, and in particular we are going to be looking at the grade 12 economics, and that's what we are going to be doing. So to start with, we are just going to start by looking at the basic concepts that we need to understand and concerning externalities, and then towards the end of the video we'll then move on to look at some few questions, question papers, and we specifically will just be extracting some few questions that we asked around the concepts of externalities, just to try and emphasize on the concepts that we would have learned. Okay, right, so just to get started, let's start by looking at our concept. Okay, so now let's look at some key concepts that you need to understand in this area of externalities. Now, the first thing that we need to understand, remember, we say the externalities are the external cost or benefits that are going to be enjoyed by third parties. In other words, the people that were not involved in the initial transaction. The benefit that they enjoy or the cost that they are going to bear as a result of the transaction that would have taken place. That is what is called an externality. And our externalities, they are generally two. We have what is called positive externalities, which is the ones which looks at the benefit that is going to be enjoyed by third parties as a result of a transaction that would have taken place. And then we have the second type, which is called the negative externality, which is the cost that is going to be borne by third parties as a result of the transaction that took place. So what we need to understand is when we talk about a positive externality, it results from the benefit that is going to be enjoyed. So when we talk about a positive externality, externality, it results from a benefit. Okay, it results from a benefit, okay, that is going to be enjoyed by people who are not involved in the transaction, okay, who I am calling the third parties. Okay, and then we have the other one that is called the negative externality. The negative externality, it results from the cost that is going to be borne by third parties. In other words, these are people that were not involved in the transaction. Okay, an example of products that give a positive externality is we are looking at merit products, merit goods. Okay, things like education, for example. Okay, things like vaccination, for example. Okay, they give a positive externality. And then negative externality, we are looking at demerit products, things like cigarettes. Okay, things like alcohol. Okay, those demerit products, things like even the pollution that is caused by firms when they manufacture their products, that causes negative externalities. So what we now need to understand is we also need to understand that we need to know that our marginal social benefit, there's something that is called marginal social benefit. Now, marginal social benefit is the benefit that is going to be enjoyed by society as a whole as a result of the consumption of merit products, or as a result of consuming those goods that give a positive externality. The benefit that is going to be enjoyed by society is what is called the marginal social benefit. So our marginal social benefit is made up of the benefit that you enjoy as an individual, which is called the marginal private benefit. Okay, and then we also have a benefit because it's a positive externality, so it means we also have what is called the marginal external benefit. Okay, so our marginal social benefit is made up of marginal private benefit, okay, plus the marginal external benefit. Okay, so this is a benefit that was enjoyed by you as the person who participated, okay, in the transaction, the positive reward that you got for undertaking a transaction. That's your marginal private benefit, okay? And then we have the marginal external benefit, which is the benefit that is going to be enjoyed by society or people that were not involved in the transaction, but they are going to benefit from what you have done, okay? For example, if we are talking about maybe education, for example, your marginal private benefit is you are going to have a good living, okay? You'll find a good job, and then you'll earn a decent life and all those other things. That's a private benefit that you are going to get, okay? And then to that, we are going to add the benefit that is going to be enjoyed by society. We are talking about the benefit that, because you are educated, the benefit that is going to be enjoyed by your family members, the benefit that is going to be enjoyed by the society where you come from, and the benefit that is going to be enjoyed by the country as a whole, as a result of you having done so well in your studies. So that is external benefit, and then there is a private benefit. So when we add the two, the benefit that us as a society are going to enjoy from you having been educated, we add it to your benefit, we get what is called the marginal social benefit, which is the benefit that is enjoyed by the society as a whole, okay? And then the next one, we have the other one that we also need to understand, which is called the marginal social cost, okay? Our marginal social cost is made up of two components. Again, we have what is called the marginal private cost, okay? We have what is called the marginal private cost, okay? And then we are going to add what we call the marginal external cost, okay? We add our marginal external cost, okay? Now our marginal social cost, okay, our marginal social cost is the cost that is going to be borne by society as a whole as a result of someone who would have consumed a demerit product, okay? Now the cost that is going to be borne by society as a result of someone having used a demerit product, or as a result of the firms operating and then they dispose their waste onto either our water bodies, or they pollute the land, or they pollute the air, and then all those other things. There's a cost that is going to be attached to that, and that cost is what is called external cost. And then the cost that was borne by the business itself is what is called the marginal private cost. So when we add the cost that was borne by the business itself plus the cost that was suffered by the society, third parties, people that were not involved in the transaction, okay, the cost that they are going to be. So when we add these two together, we get the cost that is borne by the society as a whole, which means it's the firms plus the third parties all brought together. Then we say we have our social cost, okay? So this is now what we need to understand. We have our social benefit, and we have what is called social cost, okay? Now these are the things. Now let's just turn to the positive externalities, and then we can now understand what positive externalities are. All right, so now let's turn our focus to positive externalities. Now, someone might be asking what positive externalities, but just to remind you, remember we said positive externalities are those benefits that are going to be enjoyed by third parties. In other words, the people that were not involved in the initial transaction. The benefit that is going to be enjoyed by the those third parties is what results in what we call positive externalities, okay? And then we also said, remember, we said our marginal social benefit, which is the benefit that is enjoyed by the whole society, is made up of marginal private benefit, which is the benefit that is enjoyed by the people that are directly involved in the transaction, plus the marginal external benefit, which is the benefit that is going to be enjoyed by third parties, which are the people that were not involved in the transaction. Okay, and an example of such is like we are talking about the vaccination. If one is vaccinated, it means the person who got vaccinated is involved in the transaction, and then there's a benefit that is going to be enjoyed by those people that were not vaccinated. Okay, and that benefit that is going to be enjoyed is what you call the marginal external benefit. Okay, so you just need to keep that in mind. So let's just go to our graph, and I'm going to use the graph to explain how we represent our positive externalities. How do we draw a positive externality on a graph? So obviously this one is just an ordinary price side. It's just an ordinary graph, so that's price, that's our origin there, and then this side we have our quantities. Okay, right, and then we have a downward sloping curve like this one. Okay, and our downward sloping curve is going to represent what we call the marginal private benefit. Okay, the marginal private benefit, okay, which is the benefit that is going to be enjoyed by the consumers who bought the product, okay, or who participated in the economic activity. Okay, so their benefit is going to be indicated by the marginal private benefit. And then we also have this positive slope or positive curve, which we are going to call the marginal private cost. Okay, so our marginal private cost is that cost that is going to be incurred by the business, okay, or the people that are directly involved in the activity. Okay, so we have our marginal private cost, which looks like our supply curve, and then we have our marginal private benefit, which looks like a demand curve. Okay, and then we have this area here where the purportedly supply meets our demand curve there, which we call the equilibrium point. Okay, right, now at that point it would appear that people are demanding, let's check on the quantities. They are demanding quantity Q0. They are demanding quantity Q0, and then they are going to pay this price for quantity Q0. They are going to pay the price which is P0. Okay, right, and then now if this is a positive externality, remember we said it's the benefit, there's an external benefit that is going to be enjoyed by third parties. So it means we are going to have third parties enjoying an external benefit, and that forces this demand curve to shift to the right, forming a new demand curve that I'm going to call the marginal social benefit. Okay, so what is marginal social benefit? We said here marginal social benefit is made up of marginal private benefit, which is our marginal private benefit, which is this one, okay, plus our marginal external benefit. So we are going to believe that the marginal external benefit is the gap or the difference that we have between our marginal social benefit and our marginal private benefit, which in this case is going to be illustrated by this distance here that we have between the marginal social benefit curve and the marginal private benefit curve. Okay, right, so in our graph now, I'm just going to illustrate the area that represents our marginal social benefit, our marginal external benefit, and it would appear that if I draw a line like this, we are saying this whole area here, okay, the whole area that we are going to see here this whole area that you are seeing on this triangle E, and that point and that point, this whole area that you are seeing here is what represents our marginal external benefit. Okay, and that marginal external benefit is what we are saying it represents the positive externality. That's the external benefit that is going to be enjoyed by third parties, the people that were not involved in the initial transaction. Okay, right? So if we are to continue with this, maybe let me just label this. I'll label this one E1, because now it's after the shift of the curve. Okay, our curve is shifted to the right. Let me just correct that. Our curve is shifted to the right, and then it gave us the new curve that we said is our marginal social benefit. Okay, so our curve is shifted to the right, and then now we have that new equilibrium, which is E1, and then I will probably just call this point here point B. Okay, I will just call it B. Okay, now this area that is E1 and B, it is the area that represents our positive externality. Okay, so it means this area here is what represents our positive externality. This whole area that you are seeing here is what represents our positive externality, which is the external benefit that is going to be enjoyed by third parties, the people that were not involved in the transaction. Okay, so in the exam learners, it's important that you indicate the area that is representing the positive externality. Now, this is what it means. If the market had been left to its market mechanisms, if we had left the market forces to operate on their own, okay, we were going to produce quantity Q0 and sell that quantity Q0 at price PO, and even the consumers, they were going to consume quantity Q0 and they were willing to pay price PO if we had left it to the forces of demand and supply, to the market mechanisms. Okay, but on these demerit products now, it would now mean that the position that is going to give us optimum consumption, that is going to give us social efficiency. Okay, the social efficiency point is going to be enjoyed at point E1. That's the point that they are supposed to be producing. If the markets were operating in an efficient way, they were going to produce quantity, which I'm going to show here. They were going to produce quantity Q1. Okay, if the markets were efficient, they were going to produce quantity Q1, that is what was going to be supplied. Okay, they were going to supply at this. Okay, and then probably even the consumers were going to be willing to pay the price, which is going to be illustrated here. Okay, the consumers were going to be willing to pay more for the product because they are knowledgeable of the benefits that the product gives. Okay, so it means if the markets were going to be efficient, then it meant that consumers were going to be willing to pay price P1 for the product, and then they were going to consume, they were willing to consume quantity Q1, and even the suppliers were willing to produce quantity Q1 because they are knowledgeable of the benefit that accrues from using the product. Okay, but now if we leave the forces of demand and supply, the market forces, to determine, we are going to end up having producers producing quantity Q0 and consumers are going to be paying price PO. Why? Because they are not knowledgeable of the benefit that results from using the product. Okay, they are not knowledgeable of the benefits that result from using the product. So in such cases, that's why we then said externalities, they are the cause of a market failure, because we are saying in this case they are not knowledgeable of the benefit that accrues from having used the product. Okay, now this point that we looked at, this point that is called point E, it illustrates this point, the original point E, which was as a result of the private cost and private benefits. It illustrates a socially inefficient point. It is called the social inefficiency point. It's called the social inefficiency point. Why? Because it excludes the external benefit that is going to be enjoyed by society. So this point here is socially inefficient. Okay, and then this point that we have here, where we have considered the external benefit that is going to be enjoyed by society, it represents what we call the social efficient point. It illustrates what is called the social efficient point. Why? Because we are saying now we have now included the external benefit that is going to be enjoyed by third parties, those people that were not involved in the transaction. So it would now mean that if people were knowledgeable, then they were going to consume more. They were going to consume Q1, and they were going to be willing to pay more for the product, which is P1. And this is quite characteristic with merit goods. Okay, like you would recall when you were looking at your macroeconomics, that you identified that merit goods, they are beneficial products like education, for example. Okay, and generally the businesses, they are going to undersupply on these products. Why do they undersupply? It is because they are not knowledgeable of the external benefit that is going to be realized from using the product. And even the society themselves, the people are not willing to pay more for it. Why? Because they are not knowledgeable of the benefit that is going to result from having used the product. Okay, so when we looked at that, we said that's merit goods. And this point here, this area here, this area that I have shaded here, we said it represents, okay, that area that I have shaded, let me just correct this, okay, this area here, this area that I have indicated here, it illustrates positive externality. It illustrates positive externality. Of course, in exams you are supposed to write in full the word positive externalities. Okay, right, but this whole area here is illustrating positive externalities. Okay, and what is the significance of that? The positive externality, it indicates welfare gain. In other words, that's the gain that is enjoyed by society as a result of you having consumed a product that is giving a positive externality. Okay, like education, for example. Okay, like vaccination, for example. Okay, so if you consume that product, it gives a positive externality, and that positive externality represents welfare gain. Okay, so this is what we were talking about when we spoke about positive externalities. Now let's just turn our focus to the next one, which is negative externalities. While we have noted that a positive externality is a benefit that is enjoyed by third parties, okay, the people that were not involved in the transaction, the benefit that they accumulate, it's positive. Now, negative externality is the cost that is going to be borne by third parties, okay, the people that were not involved in the transaction. So this is what we are saying. When we have a negative externality, I'm just going to illustrate it using a graph. Okay, and as always, you know, we label our graphs. This one is my quantity side, okay, and then this one is going to be my origin, and then this one obviously is the side where I write the price. Okay, now if it is a positive, if it is a negative externality, remember this one, it still represents our cost, right? So it represents our benefits, so it's still our marginal private benefits, okay, which is the benefit that is going to be enjoyed by individuals who are directly involved in the transaction. And then we have this one here, it's representing our marginal, okay, private cost to start with. okay. And then we also have because it's a negative externality, it means we have an external cost that is going to be borne by third parties, which means it's our cost that is shifting. In our positive externality, it was the benefits that were shifting. In a negative externality, it's the cost that is shifting. In other words, the cost is going to be borne by third parties, and then that gives us what we call our marginal social cost, okay. And then now this marginal social cost is as a result of the supply curve having shifted to the left like that, okay. Now if that happens, if we are to label this, then this one is my original equilibrium point, and the people were consuming at this point here, we're consuming at this point here, okay. And then it was probably Q 0, okay, the original quantity that they were consuming. And then we had our price, which we said the price was a P 0, okay. Now because of the negative externality, the cost, there is a cost that is going to be borne by society, okay. And that cost that is borne by society is represented by this part here, this part here. I'm just going to shade it, this part here, this whole area here is what represents the negative externalities, okay. It's the external cost. This whole area here is the external cost, okay, that is borne for using a product. So what we are saying now is this area here, it's a negative externality, and this negative externality, it illustrates or it demonstrates a welfare loss, okay. This negative externality represents welfare loss. This one is negative externality, okay, negative externality, okay. And that negative externality, it represents welfare loss, okay. In other words, the society has lost out as a result of the use of that particular product, or as a result of the firms that are operating and polluting the rivers. So there is a cost that is going to be borne by people that were not involved in the transaction. So that cost that they are going to bear is what is called the negative externality. So this is what we mean when we say negative externality, and that's how it is illustrated using a graph. So what is important for learners to remember is when we talk about negative externality, it's the cost curve that is going to shift. When we talk about a positive externality, it's the benefits that are going to shift, okay. All right. And then you also need to understand that our marginal private benefit plus our marginal external benefit is equal to our marginal social benefit, and then our marginal private cost plus marginal external cost is equal to marginal social cost, okay. So it's very important that you know that, okay. I'm glad you now understand that. All right, let's just go and turn to questions so that we can now start answering the questions. Okay, so let's see what we have. Okay, it's now time for the questions and question and answer. Now you can see on my screen there that I'm sharing with you a question. This is a question that I adopted from the November 2022 economics paper 2. That was the NSC paper 2. Okay, and this one was question 2.4. So generally it starts by saying use the graph below and to explain the effects of negative externality on the market. Okay, now you can actually see that it's written negative externality, but even if it was not written negative externality, you learners would now need to know that this is negative externality graph. Why? Because we have a social cost and we have private cost, and it means this this cost that is shaded here, it resembles an external cost that was borne by third parties who are not involved in the initial transaction. Okay, so that would show that this is negative externality. And then we can also see that even the price is shifting from P to P1. This would mean that there's an increase, there's an external cost that has been incurred, okay, by third parties. And initially, when we had MPC, the marginal private cost, and we had our marginal private benefit, we had our equilibrium point, which was E. Okay, now and then after the external cost, it had shifted to the left. It resulted in a reduction in the quantity that is being consumed and an increase in price. So this shows that there's a negative externality. Okay, right. Now let's just look at the question. The question says, use the graph below to explain the effects of negative externality on the markets. The effects of negative externality on the markets. So if I'm to you are going to use a graph, you must use the graph. Use the graph to explain the effects of negative externality on the market. Okay, so you are supposed to explain the effects of negative externality on what? On the markets. Okay, so that's what you should now do. So here we are seeing that the market equilibrium is at point E. That's what we can see, that the market equilibrium is at point A. This is where our supply curve was meeting our demand curve, and then we had our marginal private cost being equal to the marginal private benefit. Okay, so it was at point E. Okay, it was at this point here. Okay, that's where we were. So now the market equilibrium is at point E. Okay, and this point E, it represents what we call social inefficiency. We call it social inefficiency because the marginal private cost is equal to the marginal private benefit. So it's social inefficient because it's looking at the marginal private cost being equal to marginal private benefit. Okay, so the point E, it represents what we call social inefficiency. Okay, now then so you were going to say at point E, that's where we have the marginal, that's where we have the social inefficiency, because our marginal private cost is equal to our marginal private benefit. And then you do now also need to understand that when the market is left to its own devices, the quantity Q, this quantity Q here, is going to be produced. Quantity Q is going to be produced and it is going to be sold at price P. Okay, right? So quantity Q, if we leave the market at its own, to operate on its own using its own mechanisms, quantity Q is going to be produced and it's going to be sold at price P. Okay, and then we then have our social inefficiency at the point E. Okay, now when external costs, okay, which is the negative externality, when it is taken into account, it would now appear that we are going to have an increase in the price and the production is going to go down. The production of those goods is going to go down, okay, and the price is going to go up, okay, to what? To point E1. Okay, it will shift to point E1, creating a new equilibrium point E1. Okay, now at point E1, we are seeing that there is a higher price, which is now P1. Okay, and the quantity that is now going to be provided or produced is going to reduce to quantity Q1. Okay, it's going to reduce to quantity Q1. Okay, now we now know that this shaded area here represents what we call the welfare loss. So what were you supposed to do in this question here? We have just studied the graph. So in this question here, what you were supposed to do was you were supposed to use the graph, which would mean now that learners, when you answer such a question, you are supposed to be giving us the figures, quote the figures that that are given here. Give us the facts from the graph that has been provided. Like we are saying, if we leave the market mechanisms to determine, we are going to have quantity Q being produced, and it will be sold at price P. Okay, and the quantity that we have an equilibrium point, which is point E, and at that equilibrium point E, it shows or it illustrates social inefficiency. Okay, and then you now need to then go to explain that when external costs have been included, it results in a shift of the margin of the supply curve from MPC to MSC, or you were going to say from SS to S1. Okay, illustrating that there is an external cost that has been incurred. Okay, now you would now need to understand that at a new position S1 and DD, we are going to have a new equilibrium position, which is E1. And at point E1, it shows that the price has increased from P to P1, and the quantity that is going to be produced is going to reduce from Q to Q1. So this is how you answer these kind of questions, where you are asked to use the graph, because the question says use the graph. So you are expected, when you are asked to use the graph, you are expected to give the facts as is presented on the graph. Give us the figures from the graph, to use the figures in the graph to explain what you are trying to explain. Because if you don't use the figures on the graph, like most of the cases, you will be penalized for that. So it's always very important that when you explain a certain point, then give us the facts based on the graph that has been provided to you. Because the question says use the graph to explain the effects of negative externalities on the market. Okay, so that's how you were supposed to have answered that particular question. Okay, so let's just move to the next question and see what we were supposed to have done. Okay, so let's just look at what we have here. We can see that it says study the information below and answer the questions that follow, and then we can see that it's market failure, government intervenes, and then you can see that there is a cartoon there where someone is saying we demand a living wage. And then let's just read what is being said there. There are many causes of market failure, such as externalities, merit goods, and unequal income distribution. In January 2019, the government intervened to address unequal income distribution and announced a national minimum wage. This announcement was supported by COSATU and Federation of the Unions of South Africa. And then that's just an extract. And then this one was adopted from the FIN 24 on the 1st of January 2019. That's when the article was published. So now, the question that we have is the 2.3.1. Name one type of an inefficiency that results from market failure. Now, we have two types of inefficiencies that result from market failure. And the first one that we now know of is what is called the allocative efficiency. Okay, and the second one that we now know of is what is called the technical or productive inefficiency. So you could have given any one of that, it was going to be accepted as correct. So we are saying the two types of inefficiencies that result from market failure is productive inefficiency, which can also be called technical inefficiencies, or it can be what is called the allocative inefficiency. Remember, allocative inefficiency is when the scarce resources are used to produce goods that are not needed by the market. Okay, and then productive inefficiency is when we fail, or when firms fail to produce the maximum output from the given resources. We fail to produce maximum possible output from the given resources. That's productive inefficiency. Okay, so those two inefficiencies, they are the ones that result from market failure. Okay, it is an indication that the markets have failed. Okay, right. And then the next question, the 2.3.2, give one reason, one redress policy that government uses to redistribute income. Redress policy that the government uses to redistribute income. So what we now know from our grade 11, when we're looking at inequalities, the problems of inequalities, I think you now recall that you looked at some of the redistribution measures or policies that the government has put in place, and one of them that is in place is what is called a land redistribution. Now when you talk about land redistribution, we are saying it's giving land to the people that never owned the land before. Okay, you are taking land from someone who has a lot and you give that piece of land to other people who never owned the piece of land before. Okay, that's a redistribution. And then we have the second one that is called restitution. Now when you talk about land restitution, this is where you are taking land from someone who has plenty and you are giving back to the ones who previously owned the piece of land. Okay, now for example, if you owned a piece of land and then some people come and take that piece of land, okay, they come and take the piece of land from you. Okay, we are restituting the land. If we take back the land from the person who took it away from you and giving back to you who previously owned the land, then we are saying that's restitution. So it's another redress policy. So we have land redistribution policy, we have land restitution policy, we have the other one that is called the BEE or the triple BEE, which is the Black Economic Empowerment or the broad-based Black Economic Empowerment. Okay, I want to believe that you still remember that. And then we also have the other one that is the minimum wage. So those are some of the redress policies that the government has used to redistribute income in South Africa. Okay, so you could have given us any one of that, it was going to be accepted as correct. So which are the policies? We say the land redistribution policy, we say the land restitution policy, we said the BEE or the triple BEE, we said the other one is minimum wages. Okay, those are some of the policies. Even some affirmative action, those are the also policies that have been used to redistribute income. Okay, right. Then we go to the next question. So any one of that was going to be accepted as correct. Then the next one, briefly describe the term merit goods. Now when we talk about merit goods, we are saying these are goods that are considered to be beneficial to everyone. So everyone who in society should consume these goods, okay, regardless of their income levels. Okay, so whether they have money or they don't have money, it is important that everyone gains access to these goods. Everyone should consume these goods. Okay, right. And example of such goods, obviously the example is not required here, but I'm just explaining the example as well. The example of such goods is attending an economics class, like what you are doing. It's something that everyone should do, because it's important. You can now agree that it's really beneficial to be a learner who is studying economics. It's very, very important. Okay, right, because we have a certain understanding of the economy which not everyone else has, and it's an important aspect of life. Okay, congratulations for those who are studying the subject. Okay, then the next one, why does a negative externality result in overproduction of goods and services? Okay, now what happens with the negative externality? What we have noted from the previous graph is negative externality, it tends to exclude the external cost. So because it excludes the external cost, it means the producers are going to produce more of those goods, because they tend to exclude the external cost in their cost structure. So they don't look at the external cost. Okay, so there's a tendency of producers producing a lot of those goods. Okay, now this is the reason why there is overproduction. It is because the producers, they exclude the external cost when they are producing the goods. Okay, so as such, it would now mean that they are going to find that maybe it's cheaper to produce the goods, and in the process, having excluded the external costs, they will overproduce those products. Okay, so there is always that overproduction of demerit products because producers are not considering the external cost that is going to be borne by third parties. Okay, and this normally external cost that is going to be incurred by third parties, which is not included in the market price, it lowers the cost of production. Okay, and it allows producers to produce more than they should. Okay, right, I hope you understood why there's an overproduction of that. It's because of the exclusion of external cost in the market price. Okay, right, then the next one, it says explain the negative consequences of minimum wages on the economy. Now, when the government imposes minimum wages, what it does is it reduces on the demand for labor. That's one thing that it does. It reduces on the demand for labor. And if it reduces on the demand for labor, this is what it means. It means there is going to be high levels of unemployment in the country because the businesses are not going to be hiring as many people as they used to do before. Okay, because now it's expensive for them to employ people. Okay, now this is what it will do. So it will increase on unemployment. Okay, that's one negative consequence of minimum wage. And then the other consequence of minimum wage, we are saying, because the more people now are not employed, it means that the government tax revenue is going to reduce because government is unable to get taxes like pay as you earn. Okay, the income taxes, because fewer people now are employed. So it would now mean that the government tax revenue is going to reduce because of lower employment levels. Okay, which obviously reduces, or which actually increases on the social welfare burden on the part of the government. In other words, more people now will depend on the government for their basic needs, and necessities. Okay, they will depend on the government to provide those. Okay, so that's the negative effect there. And you would also find that when we have lower employment levels, it would mean that there is going to be lower quantities of goods and services that are going to be produced. And if there is those lower quantities of production, we are saying production is going to decrease. It would mean that we are likely going to have inflation. Why? Because the supply is reduced, and if demand remains unchanged, then we are going to have inflation pressures, which are going to be driven by demand, which you call demand pull inflation. Okay, so those are some of the negative effects of the implementation of the minimum wage. Now remember, this question specifically required negative consequences of the minimum wages. So you were supposed to look at the negative. What are the negative effects of imposing minimum wages? So the effects are, it results in higher unemployment levels, it results in a decrease in the production levels, and if production goes down, then it might result in increased inflationary pressures, and it might also result in the lower demand for labor, because now labor is expensive. And you would also need to understand that if we impose minimum wages, let's say the businesses, they don't retrench people. Okay, right, if they don't retrench people and they keep all their employees and continue to pay them what they are supposed to be earning, it would now end up resulting reducing on the global competitiveness of our products, because now the cost of producing goods is now more expensive for our local businesses to be able to produce goods. When they produce goods, they are producing them at a higher cost, which would mean that they may not be able to compete with other companies that are outside the country on a global scale, okay, which means it's going to eventually reduce on our ability to export goods to other countries, okay. So those are some of the negative effects of the imposition of minimum wages. So you could have given us any two of that. Remember, in economics, this is a 4-mark question, so you are supposed to give 2 points. 2 points, okay, because in economics you now know that we give 2 marks per correct statement. So you are supposed to give us 2 statements for you to be able to get those 4 marks, okay. Right, I hope you did understand that one. Right, let's just look at the last question in the next slide, okay. Okay, so now on this question, we are looking at question 2.5, and then it says evaluate the impact of producer subsidies by government on the businesses. So it's the impact of producer subsidies by government on the businesses. So the impact of producer subsidies by government on the business, okay, on the business sector. And you are supposed to evaluate. That's your verb there. You're supposed to evaluate. Okay, so now when you talk about the word, when in the exam, when an examiner says evaluate, what you are supposed to do is remember a learner can have a positive stance. In other words, you can give your positive arguments, okay, in support of, you can be in support of, okay, the production subsidies, okay, that's a positive stance. Or a learner can have a negative stance. In other words, you can be against the idea, okay, or a learner can also take a neutral stance where you are not positive, you are not negative. You can give both sides of the argument, okay. So when the question says evaluate, you are expected as a candidate to either give a positive view, a negative view, or a neutral stance where you are going to give both the positive and the negatives of a producer subsidy in this context, okay. So the question here says evaluate the impact of producer subsidies. Now when we talk about subsidies, dear learners, we are saying these are grants that are given by the government normally to producers to try and encourage the production of certain goods. And normally you would now know that a subsidy is normally given when the product is a merit product. A subsidy is given when the production of those goods are probably merit products. And the reason why it's given on merit products is, one, it is given to encourage the production of those merit products, and also to lower on the cost of production for those merit products, so that if there is a lower cost, then producers can be able to produce more. And then it means even the people, the community members, they will be able even to buy more of those particular products because they are relatively cheaper, okay. So it would now mean that when we talk about the impact of producer subsidy, you would now need to understand that it stimulates the production and it helps in keeping the prices low, which will improve the competitiveness, okay. And then the second thing that it does is it encourages businesses to provide more of those merit goods, those goods that are beneficial, okay, those merit goods and services, those goods and services that are beneficial. It encourages the businesses to produce more of those goods, okay. And because we now know that these goods, they generally generate what is called the positive externalities. So it encourages the production of those goods, and hope you're knowing that those goods, they are going to generate positive externality, Okay, so that's the other second reason why governments can give a production subsidy. And then the other reason why or the effect of a producer subsidy is you would now understand that we said it reduces the cost of production. Now if it reduces the cost of production and it reduces the cost of capital, it allows those projects to be stimulated. It encourages growth of those projects. Okay, for example, a producer subsidy that is given to encourage the production of a certain product, it would mean that businesses can use that amount of money to buy probably equipment to produce better those products and produce more of those products and produce more efficiently those products. Okay, so these are some of the positives that it brings in, because it will then reduce the cost of capital. Okay, for businesses. Okay, or the cost of capital investment for certain projects that are being undertaken. Okay, right. And then you would also need to understand that the producer subsidy, it also enables the businesses to earn more profits, because now there is a lower cost of production. In other words, their cost of producing goods has gone down, and if selling price remain the same, then it means it allows the businesses to earn more profits. Okay, so those are some of the positive effects of producer subsidies to the business sector. And then we also have even the negative effects as well of those producer subsidies. Now, what happens with the producer subsidies when it's given? It tends to distort the cost structure of a business. In other words, it lowers the cost, it distorts, because for example, let's say it costs you 10 rands to make a loaf of bread. For example, brown bread, it costs you 10 rand to make a loaf. Okay, now if the government comes in and gives you a subsidy maybe of 2 rands a loaf of bread, it would mean that you are going to end up assuming your cost to have reduced to 8 rands, which is not correct. Your cost has not reduced. The only thing that is done, that has happened, is the government has given you a subsidy, so the government is going to pay the other 2 rand for you. Okay, but your cost structure has remained unchanged. Okay, so that's one major negative effect of a subsidy. What it does is it distorts the cost structure of businesses. Okay, and then you would also need to understand that those businesses that get the production subsidy normally, they tend to have an advantage over their competitors. They tend to have an advantage over their competitors, which obviously will tend to shy away competition. It will tend to lock other businesses away from operating. Okay, competing fairly, because a certain business is getting a subsidy and another business is not getting a subsidy, so it will compromise the ability of businesses to compete fairly. It's going to be compromised. Okay, so that's the other problem with a subsidy. It compromises, it distorts the market prices. Okay, and then the other effect that it does is you would find that these subsidies, they tend to promote inefficiencies. There are certain businesses that are not supposed to be getting a subsidy in any case, because those subsidies, those businesses are not effective, are not efficient in their operations. So in instances where a business was supposed to restructure, it's not going to restructure, because a subsidy is covering up for those shortcomings or for those weaknesses that were naturally supposed to be addressed if the subsidy was not given. Okay, so it tends to protect inefficiencies. Okay, and then you also need to understand that subsidies, they cause firms to become too dependent on it, and sometimes businesses might struggle to survive if the subsidy is then withdrawn. withdrawn from them. So those are some of the disadvantages of subsidies. So what I was expecting, because this one is an 8-mark question, a learner could have given 4 points. If you were negative, then you could have given 4 points that are negative. What are those points? You are saying it sometimes distorts the market prices. You say sometimes it covers inefficiencies, it causes businesses to be dependent on it, and then sometimes if the subsidy is not allocated fairly, the businesses might be compromised. In other words, the survival of all the other businesses might be compromised because it's not fairly distributed normally, these subsidies. Okay, so you could have given us any 4 of those, okay, if you were negative. If you were positive, then you could have given us any 4 on the positive side. Or if you were neutral, then I expected that you were going to give us 4 in total, because remember, in economics it's 2 marks per correct statement. So what we expected was, in an 8-mark question, learners, you should not give any number of statements that are less than 4, okay, for you to be able to get all the 8 marks. Okay, so I always encourage you to give at least 4 statements. Okay, give 4 statements if it is an 8-mark question. Okay, right. So that's all that we had in today's edition of the homeschooling adventures, and this video that we were particularly looking at externalities. Okay, so I want to believe that you have learned something, and you are going to find this to be useful and quite handy in your studies. If you like the video, click the like button and remember to subscribe to the channel. All the best in your studies. I'm out.